Kit Carstairs, hello. Welcome,
Hi,
welcome to Live Diversified. It's great to have you here today.
thank you. It's a pleasure.
Kit Carstairs has a background in book and magazine publishing, academic research, marketing, and broadcasting. She has almost a decade of experience working with a wide variety of content, including fiction, general nonfiction, as well as working with corporate and academic content. She has experience as a freelancer, in-house editor, and project manager in publishing. And you can find her at manuscriptagency.com.au. AU because she lives in beautiful Australia. Yeah, and this in the inspirational surrounding of the Blue Mountains in Australia's New South Wales. Uh, Great. Tell me about first question is about Australia and the beauty of Australia. Tell me more
It's
about your country.
it's like your website. It's very diverse. It changes all everywhere you go. So I've lived all around Australia, and it's obviously a very very big country. And yeah, it's very very different. I lived my first few years in Melbourne, which is quite urban, but it's got these beautiful kind of rolling landscapes, very much like the UK. It gets a lot of cold weather and it gets a lot of rain, so it can be quite beautiful, but it also spends a lot of its time in drought, so it can also be quite dry and brown, and which is kind of reflective of Australia, I think, is the drought and the brown and the dusty grit of the place. I think, it's a really beautiful country, but it's not soft and genteel like, like
Mm,
the United Kingdom or what have you. It's a much harsher beauty. But yeah, wherever you go, it's just very different. It's very hard to describe. We run a B&B where we live, and it's we get a lot of international guests, and yeah, it's really interesting talking to them and seeing how they see Australia and how much they love it. But it's interesting because everywhere you go, it's such a big distance to travel. It's sort of to go from one beautiful location to the next. It's a huge amount of travel, which I think always takes people by surprise. But
right. Kate, I just want you to tell me a few things about what you do there at Manuscript Appraisal Company.
the Manuscript Appraisal Agency was established in about 1996 by a man called Brian Cook, who was in publishing. He was a publisher himself, and decided to leave the traditional publishing industry and set up on his own and do his own thing. And with that, he set up the Manuscript Agency. So he established it as an appraisal business, so working with authors who really wanted to get some feedback on their manuscripts but didn't really know where to go. And he was kind of the first of his kind in Australia. So the Manuscript Agency was probably the first appraisal sort of editorial agency to be established outside the sort of the traditional publishing field. And that was kind of in response to the self-publishing market growing and sort of developing, and the publishing market sort of dwindling a lot in Australia. So I took over the business about 4 or 5 years ago when he was ready to move on, and he's now a literary agent, and he focuses his time and energy on that. And since taking it over, so I've grown it and diversified. So we basically have two arms of the business. One is the private clients of authors themselves who come to us because they want to get editorial feedback on their manuscript. And the other side is the publishing side. So we do some work for publishing houses. We act as their in-house editorial team. So a lot of publishing houses these days aren't having editorial in-house. They're looking to outsource that because they just don't have the money and the viability to have that in-house team. So we kind of are there to fill that gap. But
Okay.
in terms of our private clients, it's a really interesting market. I don't know what it's like in sort of America or what have you in other countries, but in Australia, when you go and take your book to a publishing house, they expect your manuscript to be ready, basically ready to go. So
Wow.
they don't want to do a lot of the editing themselves anymore. They don't have the time. They don't have the money. So they're really looking for things to be well polished, and that comes from a number of different reasons. But part of that is that publishing has become really, really popular. And a lot of
Okay.
people these days want to write. So I think, 50 years ago probably there weren't people who identified themselves as writers as much as they are now. Even 20 years ago, I think people now, I don't know if it's the access to computers or the internet or whatever it is, everybody's writing and everyone sort of sees themselves as a writer and wants to do something with that. So publishers are basically inundated with submissions, and they can't do a lot with them, and they want submissions that are going to stand out from the crowd. So our agency basically has stepped up, and we act as that first buffer. We do all the editorial, and we support clients and give them really honest feedback. So our role is to be honest and brutal at times, and just say, look, this is where you're at, this is where your strengths are, and this is where your weaknesses are, and this is what you need to do before you kind of take that next step. So that's
okay.
It's kind of us. Yeah.
Wow. So lots of competition then. So this has like put the bars higher, and okay. So you have to be ready. Your manuscript has to be ready. So what can they offer? I mean, on their side, a traditional publisher, if you have done most of the work, if you have done if you have a book which is ready, I mean, what do they offer on the table then? Why do people still reach all those traditional publishers if they can have the book at such a high level?
I think it's a prestige thing. I think it's still, there's something to be said about somebody backing you and putting their label to you. So having say Penguin, for instance, to have that label on your book, I still think speaks volumes. It says that it's been read by somebody who knows literature, and it's been validated by that person and that team of people who really know what they're doing. I think people want to work with that because of the gravitas that comes with that, and the history of what it means to be published traditionally. I think it's about being a part of a team and having somebody on your side, and I think as well, I mean, depending on your book, the publishing houses still do a lot of the marketing for you and with you. So they'll help build your author brand. You're not on your own with that stuff. So, and they'll still do editing, but then they're looking for somebody who has shown that they can bring their manuscript up to a point where it's really professional, where probably even 10 years ago, they would still accept something that had potential but wasn't polished.
Okay.
So I mean, I think people want that little logo on their book that says, I've been validated by somebody. And also, there's no output, there's no financial outlay for you when you go to traditional publishing. So, that's what the publishing house does. They back you in that sense. So.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So you agree that yourself that it's good to have that logo on your book, yeah?
Yeah. Look, I come from a traditional publishing background, so obviously I feel that there's something to be said for that. I still think there's something wonderful about having professionals who work with your book and can create something quite amazing in terms of design and what have you. But I mean, the self-publishing world has come in leaps and bounds in the last 5 to 10 years. It's a really different market. Even from when I bought this business, it's changed enormously. And I think there are a lot of organizations out there now that offer these amazing services. But I think the hardest thing about self-publishing is finding those services, narrowing down exactly what you want, and then finding who you identify with and who you want to work with. So it can work, and it can work really, really well. It's just a lot of work on the author's part, I think.
Right. In our previous communication, you said to me, self-publishing is a beast, and I liked that. Yeah, it is indeed.
Yeah,
it is. I can confirm that. I'm in self-publishing, and I use Amazon, to publish my books, and it is tough. It is tough.
Yeah.
It's lots of publishers and authors there. And the quality sometimes, even with Amazon, which is a good player, and they want to provide an excellent service to their customers. It's their mission statement. And still, I mean, the quality of the books you get there is so low, and it's a challenge for the readers to find good books.
So no, I was talking to my client today, and we're talking about self-publishing, and he's a self-published author, and he's a very motivated person, and has this ability to reach out to the right networks and create connections, and I think that's what it takes to be self-published. Is I think you're an example of it as well, is that you're very engaged, you're committed to it, and I think that's what it takes in self-publishing. Is it's it's not just click a button and you're published. It's a whole, you're creating a brand, you're creating your marketing, you're doing everything. It is a big beast. It's a real machine.
Exactly.
And you're doing it all.
And you need your audience, and that takes time, of course,
That's it.
for people to believe in what you do, and your authority and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's it. That's it. And as you said in your email, it is quite hard to tell, what's worthwhile and what's not. And I mean, I suppose that's where my agency, I believe it's really important to have an agency like mine, because I like to know that I'm offering a service that's quality, I think, to clients, so that we can work with clients and make sure their manuscript is the best it's going to be. So they get almost an experience like they're in-house. They get that editorial support, and they get that whole process. Unfortunately, they just need to pay for that, which, you don't as much in-house. So it's just a bit of a difference. But,
Exactly.
yeah, I think that's important.
Kit, can you give me an idea of the fees that you charge the authors? I mean, obviously, that's a general question. It depends. I mean, the genre and all that stuff. But give me just an idea. The pages, how big is the book? Yeah.
Yeah, look, it does depend. It depends on the service. I mean, our primary service is still appraisals. We offer appraisals because it's a cost-effective service, and you get a really good amount of feedback, which I really love about this business, is that, and that's what drew me to buying it in the first place, is the core business of appraisals. It gives the client the opportunity to get feedback on their work, and that structural kind of feedback. I don't know if your audience knows what structural feedback means, but it's basically that big picture. It's talking about voice, it's talking about characterization and dialogue and characters, and how they fit in the plot, and what the plot is, and the narrative structure, and this, that, and the other. So it's looking at all of that, and it's bringing it into one, handy report where we say, here are all the things that aren't working, and here are all the things that are, and this is what we feel you need to do to get it up to scratch. And for a service like that, I mean, it ranges from, I think our prices go from $450 upward, and it depends on your word count. So for our appraisals, we base it on word count bracket, and it's all on our website. So we're really transparent about that stuff.
Okay.
And it's the same for every client, unless you're a returning client, and then you get discounts. And then with editorial, it's a really hard one, actually. It's because it depends on how, sort of what standard your manuscript is at when it comes to us, and how much work we need to do. So if you came to us when your manuscript was pretty well ready, it was pretty polished, you just wanted those final structural tweaks and maybe a copy edit, that's a really different experience to if you need a full structural edit, a lot of mentoring and a lot of copy editing, because your grammar and what have you, grammar or what have you isn't up to standard. So
Okay.
It is actually really, really hard to give you a sense of it, but we try and do it a certain amount per word count, and then it fluctuates between there according to how much work is needed.
Okay.
But it's kind of like asking how long's a piece of string, unfortunately.
Right, I see. So basically, I mean, the bigger picture is obviously, I mean, what's most important. I mean, for me, for example, I'm not interested in those, mechanics like, let's say, verb grammar and things like that. I mean, the bigger picture is what is more important for me if I go to an agency like yours, right?
Yeah.
And that's tough. I mean, it takes experience. That's why I'm using your service.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's it. I get approached quite a lot by editors who want to work for us, and I'm really particular about who works for us, because I need people who have worked in the book industry, because
Excuse me.
it's when you're editing, there are different layers of editing, and you can be an editor online, or you can be an editor in magazines, or you can be an editor in corporate, and they're all very different experiences to being an editor in book publishing. The mechanics, as you say, a good editor should be able to do that no matter where they work and what kind of area that translates. But the structural editing, that's quite unique to book publishing, and it's quite a tricky one. You've kind of either got it or you don't, and experience is really important as well, I think. So yeah, I mean, structural editing is a real art form. It's a real balance as well between kind of working with the author and their voice and what they're trying to achieve, and also thinking about the reader, and also trying to take your own prejudices out of your edit as well, which can be hard sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a really important one.
Right. And tell me, I read in one of your articles that obviously you can do wonders. You have great editors there in house, but I mean, you can work with just what you have there. I mean, you cannot change everything. You cannot make like gold out of from.
No, and that's true, and that's what we often say. I mean, it's really important for clients to understand we can't weave magic out of something, that's where there's no magic. We can bring it up to scratch, and we can bring out. I think the role of an editor is to see what the gem is and try and polish that gem as best you possibly can. So, they're not all going to be diamonds. Sometimes they're quartz, and is that right? Anyway, but you get the idea. But sometimes, you're working with what you've got, so you can make it as beautiful as it possibly can be, but it won't always be the diamond that you see in the shop. Exactly. You try, but that also breaches that crosses the line of ghostwriting and writing the manuscript for somebody, and you've got to be aware that you actually as an editor can't do that. You can't put yourself into that manuscript. You've got to work with what's there, because otherwise it becomes your manuscript, and you don't want to do that. You can't take that away from the author. Exactly. You've got to be respectful of their voice.
Exactly. Good. So, talking about editing now, this is my next question. What are some, the common mistakes in English grammar that writers make? Let's talk about mechanics a little bit.
It's a hard one. Commas and apostrophes really trip people up. People just don't know what to do with them. I think because of the internet age and texting and this fast communication, I think people have forgotten how to use punctuation in general. I think it's amazing how often we'll get a manuscript in that basically just doesn't use punctuation at all. At least people are still capitalizing when they are submitting manuscripts, but it really does blow us away sometimes, the amount of or the lack of punctuation and misspellings, people just not knowing the right word and misusing words as well. So obviously in English, there's a lot of words that sound similar or are spelt, in a similar way, and people get them mixed up a lot, which I understand, that happens. But I think that's the most interesting ones that we receive. I can't. What else?
Kit, can you give me some specific examples of words that are, continually misused?
I mean, obviously, it's the obvious ones of, they are, there.
Yeah.
Those kind of ones get misused a lot. I'm trying to think. There was a really wonderful one the other day that we had.
Yeah.
It was great. What was it? I can't think. If it comes to me, I'll let you know. But
okay.
The other thing that we find is just the overuse of adjectives. So people really want to use descriptors in their manuscripts. So, and it makes it just so, it makes it quite difficult to read using all those little words. And I understand it. It's funny because I'm a writer also, and I write very much with adjectives and. It's since becoming an editor and running this business that I've suddenly gone, oh, right, okay. I can see how when you take all those out, how much better my work is. But people want to flower their work up, sometimes too much, and it loses the message. It becomes laborious to read rather than, poetic and beautiful, which I think is the intention.
Okay. So it's better to avoid all these adjectives and adverbs and use strong verbs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you can avoid those. I think, who was it that said, I think it was Mark Twain that said, if you can, cross out all those words and insert the word you'll understand what it's doing to your manuscript. And it's true. If they become stumbling blocks in your work, and people don't read them, they quite often look over them, and they don't need them either, because, as an author, we should be leading our readers down the path, not telling them what to think or feel. We should be helping them experience those feelings. And when we use those words, we're throwing words down their throat, and we're saying this is what you should think and feel. And that's what we don't want to do, I think, as an author. I think it's, you want your reader to be on a journey, and it has to be their journey within your book. So
Exactly. Let them choose the adjectives themselves, right?
exactly.
Hmm.
And that's it. The action should really determine, how you respond to the manuscript, and the scene itself. And that's obviously talking very much about fiction. But even in nonfiction, I think
Yeah,
we overdo it with our writing sometimes.
correct.
And it's
Right.
just balance.
Hmm.
It's hard.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Now, next question for you. I mean, to be a good writer, you have to read a lot. So everyone says that. I mean, famous authors always read. They start their day with reading and then they go on to writing. So give me some books that I should read if I want to improve my writing. I mean,
So,
non-fiction. Yeah.
yeah. So I thought about this. You sent this question through, and I thought about it. I thought, what books would I recommend? What would I
Hmm.
say that somebody should read? But I think it's a really hard one because we all read and we all learn and experience in such different ways. It's what works for me wouldn't necessarily work for you, sorry. And I think sometimes for me, reading snippets of different books and articles and what have you, and creating my picture for myself, that's how I learn and I engage. So I don't tend to kind of look to one book and say that's the be all and end all. That's where I've learned everything I needed to learn.
Hmm.
And what might have been a great learning curve at one point, 2 years later, is probably an irrelevant book to me. So it's quite hard at this point to say what books I find to be the most useful for perhaps novice authors. But I think at the end of the day, the most useful thing is just reading.
Hmm.
And as you said, I think reading as much as you can, not just in your genre, but reading through different genres and experiencing
Hmm.
life, walking outside sometimes and not feeling like you've got to sit down and read and write, all the time. I think it's really important to get outside and be.
Kate, this is
Uh,
really, I mean, this is what you said now is very, very important. I keep saying that myself because I mean, an author, they start with their computer, they sit there, try to imagine. I mean, if you want to write something like extraordinary, something great, go out there and live life,
that's it.
live
That's it.
extraordinarily, and then you will write extraordinarily, right?
That's it. Exactly. Or even, it doesn't even have to be extraordinary. It just has to be out and watching people and experiencing the world around you and listening to what's happening and smelling the scents around you and what have you. And I think that's really important. I think there's only so much we can do in front of our computer. I think at
Hmm.
some point you've got to walk away from that. And it is really hard. I think you feel like to be productive, you've got to be sitting down in front of that computer and doing something all the time or reading or, learning. But I think living is learning. And that's what makes a
Hmm.
great writer. And a lot of our authors, a lot of them wouldn't actually class themselves as writers. A lot of them would say, oh, I'm not a writer. I'm not an author. I don't really do this. But they are because they've lived and then they've recorded that and they've translated that for somebody to read it. And that's such an amazing skill. I think, we've just had somebody who is in the police force and he's had particular expertise and he's written this manuscript and it's not perfect at the moment. It needs work, but it's interesting because
Hmm.
it's something that I would never be able to write about.
Yeah.
I've never lived that. And I think that's what it takes is living and experiencing and seeing the world and yeah, engaging with
Ex
it.
exactly, Kate. Sometimes I get this, how can I say? Well, I quit my job and I used to work in banking in London. And sometimes this monster of productivity, of being productive
Yeah,
and working like 8 hours a day, 2 hours there, 2 hours there, boxes,
yeah.
boxes,
It's
and
hard,
that's
isn't it?
that's killing us. I mean, that's killing creativity. I mean, as you
It
said,
is.
go out, live it. And this is learning too. It's not only, your computer, your courses there and all that stuff. Life
Exactly.
is out there. Go out there and live. Just live.
That's
Um,
it. Even for me today, I work from home and I run my own business. So, I feel like to be productive, I've got to be sitting in front of my computer and working. And I got to about 4 o'clock today and I went, do you know what? I've actually my productivity today is done. I'm done for the computer. And I got up and I walked outside and I did some gardening and I planted some veggies and some strawberry plants and what have you. And it was great. I was out there for 40 minutes and I felt reinvigorated and I felt ready to go again and my brain was re-engaged and I learned something from that time that I was in the garden. I saw the worms, crawling their way through my veggies It is. It's just been out there, and it's about making mistakes as well. I think sometimes we want to know all the answers by reading all these books, but you actually have to go through the motions and make those mistakes. I think that's the only way. For me, I feel like that's such a powerful way to learn.
Exactly.
Is making those mistakes.
Great, so inspirational what you said. So, Kit, and something else, because you are in this business for a long time, you have your website there, you write a lot, you do blogging, you do partnerships with other authors, you do lots of interviews there on the website. So, what is to be a freelancer, to pitch for business, to come up with creative ideas, with marketing and stuff like that? What do you have any recommendations, any advice for people that, for bloggers, for people that want to launch something online, their own thing?
Yeah, I think it's hard. I mean, I've never aimed to be the biggest and the best out there. I've aimed to be not the biggest and the best, but the best at what I do. I don't need to be the biggest and the most powerful in the industry. I want to do what I do well, and I want to have the time to do it well. So for me, it's been a slow burn, and it's been quite purposefully slow. I've got two small children, and I balance my business with raising them and being a bed and breakfast as well. And I decided early on, whatever I did, I wanted to do it properly, and I wanted to do it well, and I wanted to do it organically. So I didn't want to go out and advertise a lot. I didn't want to go out and have advertisements in every single magazine I could find. I thought, one, I felt that was outdated. And two, I just didn't feel like it engaged in the way that I really wanted it to. I felt the way I really wanted to engage was more organically. I wanted people to engage with me as a brand rather than just see me. I wanted them to trust me. And that's still really important to me, is that people get value out of the service that I provide. And to kind of give that sense to people, I need to be living that value. I need to be showing that that's who I am. And I believe in this industry, and I believe in the organizations around me. So, for me, it's about kind of just organically, slowly, quietly just growing, kind of like being in the garden. Things don't happen overnight, and they don't happen quickly necessarily, but when you put the right amount of effort into it and you've got the right formula, I think things grow really, really well. And that's for me at the moment. I feel that if I grow it too fast and too big, and it becomes a monster, and I won't be able to do it justice, and I won't be able to do the work justice, and my clients will be dissatisfied, and that's the last thing I want. So for me, I got to a point, I think it was last year, where I built the business really quickly and I got too big, and I needed to pull back a little bit. So I pulled back, and I'm in a really good space again, where I just go, you know what, I target the right opportunities, and I wait, for those opportunities to be there. I don't take everything that comes along, I think. Mm-hmm. But then that doesn't mean that it's right. I think, it depends on what you want, and it depends on what kind of business you want and what kind of exposure. And I think, building a business like mine and with my balancing my needs is very different to somebody who's committing to be an author. I think somebody who's committing to be an author, there's a lot more that you want to be doing, because every sale of a book, is so important. And for when you sell a book, you've done all the lead work already. That person's then going to read your book. So it doesn't matter how many books you're selling. It's great, because everybody that's reading your book is still getting the same amount of quality and time and what have you. But for us, if we sell too many manuscript assessments or editorial or this, that, and the other, I feel that we wouldn't be able to offer value. So it's important for me to balance that at the moment. So, and balance our workload.
I like what you said. I mean, you are a diversified person, because you do all sorts of things. You have your family, and you manage also to have this balance, between work and family, and also you do your gardening. You have your books there, and other things, So which is great. And your bread and breakfast, you said. I didn't know about this. It's good to have a variety in life and a diversity. Right, not just one thing.
It is. I think going back to what you were saying about, working in investment banking, I got to a point as well where I just, I loved working in-house, but my journey was a little bit different, because I was actually made redundant. The business, the publishing house I was working for, went under. And so we all were made redundant on the same day. And the next day I actually found out I was pregnant with my first child. So for me, it was a real huge shift and a huge adjustment. But I'd never really enjoyed working for one organisation 5 days a week, 9 to 5, slogging it out. I just didn't feel engaged that way. I was quite happy to commit, my energy and my time, but I just felt that I wasn't always that happy. But I find now that having multiple income streams and doing multiple things and just, as you say, diversifying, I'm more engaged in every activity that I do. I enjoy each activity more because I don't do it 5 days and I'm not forced to do it. I think I do it when
I've been
from
like
need,
that.
obviously, financially, but, because I want to do it, because I want to be there. So
Nice. Yeah, it's much more fun like that. I agree. I'm like you.
yeah,
And
it's good,
we're
isn't it?
here to preach that.
Yeah, it's hard though. It is a hard move,
Oh,
I
it
think.
is.
And I'm very lucky. I've got a very supportive partner, and we work together in that sense. So, and we live outside of the city, so we don't have the financial pressures that people in cities do. So it's a different decision. But yeah, look, it's a beautiful life in that sense. It's really lovely.
Nice. Good, kids. It was lovely to have you here today. It was a really nice chat with you. I learned a lot of new things. And so, as I said, it's manuscriptagency.com.au. Kit Carstairs, thank you so much again. It was
Thank
lovely.
you. It's been a pleasure.